News Radio, 1120 KPNW. All right, so as you probably have heard, the Army has now opened its investigation into Bowe Bergdahl's departure from base. If you recall, we traded 5 basically al-Qaeda Talibanis for Bergdahl, and that created quite the storm of controversy because it has been assumed and reported and thought that Bergdahl essentially went AWOL and was captured, and that at least 6 American soldiers that we know of lost their lives going out to try and rescue him. Well, now they have opened the investigation, which is being led by 2-star Major General Kenneth Dahl. He's an officer with Afghanistan combat experience, and a lot of people are kind of questioning that a little bit. And we'll explain why. Yesterday, our guest here this hour is in court today, but he did agree to have me chat with him yesterday. His name is Brian Bouffard, and he has quite an extensive knowledge of the military justice system, and we'll explain right now why that is. So, Brian, let's talk a little bit about your background. Besides being currently a practicing attorney, you also spent some time in the Navy, and you were a JAG, correct?
I was. I am a former Navy lieutenant commander. I spent all my active duty time with the Marine Corps, though, so I kind of feel adopted by the Marines.
Okay, that's fair enough. And you've actually defended military members in court-martial cases all over the world, right?
I did and do. I am now a civilian defense counsel, so I am available to be hired by service members who are facing court-martial, and then I would come in and lead their defense. So
what we wanted to talk about this morning has to do with Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl's situation here. And so it's been announced that 2-star Major General Kenneth Dahl, who he was in Afghanistan, he has combat experience here, he's actually leading the investigation into this particular case. I mean, is it normal for somebody with that kind of background, a 2-star Major General, to be leading an investigation into something that may or may not be a case of AWOL?
It is a little unusual, and to kind of unpack this a little bit, he has been assigned to do what the Army calls a 15-6 investigation. And that is not a criminal investigation. That is more of a fact-finding investigation. And many times it does lead to criminal charges, but it's not a law enforcement type investigation. But to answer your question, no, those 15-6 investigations are most often done by captains or majors, and this is a Major General, 2-star General. So
okay.
That is a little bit unusual.
Okay, so what do you take from that? I mean, if this Major General is doing this, when generally it's somebody of lower rank who would be handling that kind of investigation, is there anything that we can infer from that?
I think it is a nod to the fact that this is a high-profile case, and that kind of cuts 2 ways. It's a high-profile case, but that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be investigated in any kind of a different way. My biggest concern with a 2-star general doing this is that I would be more concerned about political concerns kind of entering into the fray where they don't belong. I would like to see a full and fair and unbiased investigation, get all these facts out without filtering it through, the lens of what does, the White House want or what does Congress want.
Okay, so when you say that it's political, are you saying that there is going to be potentially pressure on this Major General to come back with something that's going to be more favorable to the White House than, say, that Bergdahl was indeed a deserter?
I think that that's possible. And I hate to say that, but I've seen too many situations in which politics has kind of started driving the train, and in my opinion, that is never a good thing.
So how is it any more political, I guess, and maybe I'm just being thick here, but how is this any more political with a general performing the chores as opposed to, say, a captain, when somebody from up above could be saying, Captain, I want this outcome?
It's a little bit, it would be very unusual for a typical investigation driven by, say, a captain or a major to have to have higher authority come in and say, I want it to turn out this particular way. I think that becomes a little bit easier when you're dealing with general officers and political influences of the type that could actually emanate from the White House. I mean, President Obama is the commander-in-chief. I hope that a full and fair investigation is done, but if it's being done with an eye toward not prosecuting him, even if the evidence is there, and that would be my concern.
So how could the general public then tell if this investigation, because of the military being the way that it is, that this investigation was done in a way that is going to be fair and impartial?
We might never know. We would not be privy to anything that kind of went on behind the scenes in prepping this or in vetting it once it's done. So I don't think that there's any kind of surefire way we can know whether the investigation has been properly done or not. I think we're going to end up with a result, and we're either going to, we're going to interpret it however we interpret it.
Do you know anything about Major General Kenneth Dahl? I mean, do you know, other than the little bit that we know about him, he was in Afghanistan, apparently had combat experience. I mean, do we know anything about the man in general?
I personally do not. I believe that I understand that he has a reputation as a man of integrity, as a good officer. So I certainly, applaud that choice of somebody who has that reputation. And I certainly hope and expect that he will live up to it.
Brian Bouffard is joining us. He is an attorney. He still, as a private practicing attorney, handles court-martial cases, as well as has a background as a JAG officer with the Marine Corps/Navy. All right, so the 15-6 investigation that's going on now, generally, I mean, how long does that investigation take, and at what point, if charges were going to be brought, I mean, what kind of waiting period are we looking at?
I really, truly think that we could still be talking about this case a year from now, particularly when you take into account the fact that Sergeant Bergdahl is undergoing a reintegration process that really has no timeline at all. I'm sure that they will not close the investigation until Major General Dahl has had at least the opportunity to interview Sergeant Bergdahl, and he won't be cleared for that until the medical folks say that it's okay.
Typically, who would the Major General be interviewing here? Would, besides Bergdahl, would he be interviewing, for instance, the folks that were with him? I mean, his immediate direct, commander and officers. I mean, who do they go about interviewing for this?
Well, early on in 2009, when Sergeant Bergdahl, or then PFC Bergdahl, disappeared, they probably did something very similar to a 15-6 investigation there at the time. It wasn't a criminal investigation because they didn't have, necessarily a person in custody to prosecute. Obviously, Sergeant Bergdahl was captured by the Taliban. I would anticipate that Major General Dahl will re-interview all of those witnesses who were there in 2009 at the base, people who knew Bergdahl, people who knew the circumstances of basically him laying down his arms and taking off his body armor and leaving the base. So I think now that it's been 5 years later, we certainly know more about that than necessarily we did before. So I think it would be wise for him to re-interview those folks and with an eye toward confirming or denying some material that they may already know.
So you're saying, though, that likely they've already done one of these investigations?
I believe they have. I think they did that early on, and I think it would be routine for them to do that anytime a soldier is missing. They've got to, for accountability purposes, they've got to find out what happened. So back in 2009, there was probably a lot less known about this than certainly there is now. And
so why couldn't they just, could they just go by the 15-6 investigation that they very well may have done 5 years ago and go with that, as opposed to reopen the entire thing and go through another investigation, other than just going to Bergdahl and interviewing him and getting his side of the story?
I think they could, but honestly, I think that would be kind of a poor technique. I think to go ahead and do a follow-on 15-6 investigation is a good idea. Again, my only concern is that it be done the right way and be done honestly, with bringing the evidence out and letting the chips fall where they may at this point.
Okay. So let's say that they're going to go through the 15-6, they get done with it, and a determination is made that they're going to court-martial. How long, potentially how long could this process last? You said that we could be talking about this a year from now just regarding the 15-6 investigation. This sounds like something that could potentially take years. Yeah,
and I don't want to misspeak. I don't think the 15-6 investigation is going to take terribly long. But I do think that if a decision is made to prosecute Sergeant Bergdahl, I really think that we're not going to see a trial day for at least a year from this point.
Is this the type of trial that you would like to take as an attorney? I mean, I'm just curious, as far as, personally, is this the kind of challenge you'd like to have, or is this something that you look at the political ramifications and would just prefer to stay away from?
I absolutely would take Sergeant Bergdahl's case if I were called. I do a lot of sexual assault trials in the military, and that, as I'm sure you know, is an extremely politicized issue these days. But it just underscores the fact that, everybody, no matter how heinous or ugly the crime they're accused of is, they are innocent until proven guilty. And Sergeant Bergdahl is innocent until proven guilty. And I believe in our system, and I absolutely would stand up for him.
So in the military system of justice, then, it also follows that basic rule of innocent until proven guilty, with the prosecution having to prove the case as opposed to just the defense disproving.
That's absolutely correct. It's the same burden of proof that exists in civilian criminal courts. The cynical side of me, views our constitutional history of the Fourth and Fifth and Sixth Amendments, those cherished, rights that we all have in criminal cases. The government does everything it can to get around them, and it's up to strong defense counsel to stand up on behalf of an accused and say, no, men and women have fought and died for these rights, and he will be afforded them.
Brian Bouffard, he is an attorney who specializes in military cases. I want to thank you for joining us on the Wake Up Call this morning and giving us your expert testimony, so to speak.
Bill, thanks so much for having me.
It was our pleasure. That's Brian Bouffard. It is 8:41 News Radio 1120 KPNW.